Close your eyes, settle into this moment, and let me ask you something. Why do humans fight? Not just individuals in anger, but entire societies, organizing thousands, millions, to kill and die, for causes, for territories, for ideas. What drives this behavior? What psychology underlies it? And what can warfare, this most extreme human activity, teach us about human nature itself? Tonight, we explore these questions, not through glorifying violence, but by understanding the psychology behind it, the hidden patterns, the motivations, the fears and ambitions that drove every battle, every war, every empire throughout history. Because warfare, more than any other human activity, reveals us, strips away pretense, shows what we truly are when everything is at stake. We'll journey through 12,000 years, from the first organized violence to nuclear warfare. But our focus isn't the battles themselves, it's the minds behind them, the psychology of soldiers, the motivations of leaders, the fears of civilians, the systems of control, the architecture of power. Through understanding why humans fight, how they organize violence, what makes soldiers obey, what breaks armies, what sustains empires, you'll learn universal principles about human nature, about motivation, about power, about organization, about psychology under pressure, lessons that apply far beyond warfare, to leadership, to ambition, to understanding how humans behave when stakes are highest. So breathe slowly, relax deeply, and prepare to see humanity through the lens of its most revealing activity. Let's begin at the very beginning, when warfare was born, when violence became organized, when everything changed. Chapter 1. The first violence. Imagine a warm season, perhaps 12,000 years ago. Your band arrives at the river valley, the place you visit every year, where the salmon gather in silver masses, where the roots grow sweet and abundant, where life, for a few precious months, becomes easy. The journey here has been long, through pine forests where bears roam, across grasslands where lions hunt, past the great ice sheets that still cover the north. Your people are tired, the children hungry, the elders need rest. This valley is salvation, is abundance, is the difference between survival and starvation. But this time, as you emerge from the tree line, you see them. Another band, strangers, already camped by the best fishing spots, their fires smoking, their shelters built, their claim established. And in that moment, something shifts. In human consciousness, a terrible calculation begins in the mind of your leader, in the minds of their leader, in the collective awareness of both groups. There isn't enough for everyone? Or is there? The question hangs in the air, like morning mist over the river. Let me tell you what we know from the bones. At Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, archaeologists found a cemetery dating back 13,000 years. Nearly half the bodies show evidence of violent death, embedded stone points, skull fractures, defensive wounds on forearms, men, women, even children. This wasn't murder, this wasn't random violence. This was warfare, systematic, organized, deliberate. At Natarok, in Kenya, 10,000 years ago, 27 people died, together, crushed skulls, arrows in the chest, bodies left where they fell, unburied. The attackers took nothing. This wasn't robbery, this was elimination. the complete destruction of a rival group. These bones, silent for millennia, tell us something profound. Warfare is older than agriculture, older than cities, older than civilization itself. It emerged not from complexity, but from simplicity, from the basic mathematics of scarcity and competition. The leader of your band, let's call him the first strategist. He feels something new. It's not anger. Not yet. It's assessment. His eyes move across their camp, counting, calculating. How many men do they have? 7. No. 8. We have 10. Who among them looks strong? Who looks injured? Who is young and inexperienced? He notices their weapons, spears with stone points, the same as ours, but their points look newer, sharper. This moment of calculation is perhaps more important than the violence that follows, because this is when warfare begins, not with the first blow, but with the first strategic thought, the realization that violence could be planned, organized, used as a tool to achieve an objective. The first strategist turns to his men and speaks, quietly, carefully. We will approach, slowly, show no fear, display our weapons, make them understand. We are strong. This is the birth of military psychology, the understanding that before violence comes a battle of perception, of will, of psychological dominance. But why fight at all? Both bands could share, could cooperate, could surely find enough fish for everyone. The river is generous, the valley wide. Surely there's abundance enough for 60 people instead of 30. And yet something in the human mind resists this simple solution. Let me take you deeper into this resistance. The human brain evolved over millions of years. In environments of genuine scarcity, our ancestors for countless generations lived on the edge, where a failed hunt meant starvation, where a harsh winter meant death, where competition for resources was literally a matter of survival. And so our brains developed horrid deep circuits, ancient fears, that activate whenever we perceive scarcity, even potential scarcity, even imagined scarcity. The first strategist doesn't think in these terms, doesn't know about evolution, about brain chemistry, about amygdala activation, but he feels it in his chest, in his gut, in the tension of his shoulders, a primal anxiety that whispers, not enough, not enough, not enough. If we leave, we might starve. If we share, we show weakness. We lose status. We lose the respect of our own people. And beneath it all, another calculation, one he barely admits to himself. If we win, if we drive them away, we become the band that controls the river valley. We become powerful. And power brings safety, brings resources, brings the respect of other bands, brings access to mates, brings genetic success. This is the deep logic, the evolutionary logic that makes warfare not just possible, but likely, almost inevitable. Some men in the band hesitate. They've hunted animals, tracked deer through snow, brought down elk with careful patience, felt the hot blood on their hands. But this is different. These are people, with faces, with families, with the same fears we carry. A young man, barely 20, feels his hands shaking, feels his breakfast rising in his throat, and yet others step forward, eager, almost excited. The band's best hunter, a man of 30, who's killed more game than anyone, feels something awakening, a readiness, a willingness, almost a desire for this confrontation. What makes these men different? The anthropologists tell us that in every human group, there are those who seek status through aggression, who feel alive in conflict, who find in violence a terrible clarity, not because they're evil, but because human nature is diverse, contains multitudes, includes both the peacemaker and the warrior. Some brains produce more testosterone, more dopamine in response to conflict, more activation in circuits associated with dominance. These aren't defects, they're variations, adaptations that in certain circumstances provide advantages. And warfare, from the very beginning, has always required both types, the aggressive ones to fight and the thoughtful ones to plan. The young man who hesitates, he too has a role. He'll become the one who remembers, who cautions, who says, let's try talking first. Every successful military force throughout history will need both types, the warriors and the strategists, the aggressive and the cautious, the sword and the counsel. It happens at dawn, not because of strategy, not yet, but because that's when courage is highest, when the night's fears fade, when action becomes possible. The two bands face each other, across 100 yards of riverbank. The first strategist steps forward, his best men flanking him. Weapons raised but not threatening. Not yet. Shouting, displaying, trying to intimidate without fighting. This is our valley. We've hunted here for generations. Our fathers' fathers fished these waters. The other leader responds, equally loud, equally defiant. We came first this season. We are here. We will not leave. Back and forth, the verbal warfare, rising in intensity. This is important to understand. Even in that first conflict, humans tried to win without violence, through display, through threat, through psychological warfare, because even then, we understood that actual fighting is costly. People die, people you know, people you need, for hunting, for defense against predators, for survival. Chimpanzees do this too. Our closest relatives display and threaten before actual violence. But chimpanzee raids are opportunistic, impulsive, spontaneous. What's happening at the river valley, is different. This is planned, coordinated, strategic. The first strategist has positioned his men, the strongest in front, the younger ones behind, spears ready. He's watching their formation, looking for weakness, for fear, for the moment when their will might break. The shouting continues. 10 minutes, 15, 20, both sides hoping. The other will back down, but neither does. And so, inevitably slowly, the violence begins, not as a charge, not as a rush, but as a slow advance. Step by step, weapons raised. The gap closes. 80 yards, 60, 40. Hearts pounding, mouths dry, the primal fear, rising. And then, at 20 yards, someone throws a spear, arcing through morning air, falling short, landing harmlessly. But the barrier is broken. The threshold crossed. More spears fly, stones hurled. The air fills with projectiles, and then they meet. The first strategist confronts the opposing leader, spear against spear, strength against strength. Around them, individual combats erupt. The band's best hunter grapples with a smaller man, his superior strength telling quickly. The young man who hesitated finds himself facing an opponent, acts on instinct, on training from hunts, thrusts his spear, feels it sink into flesh, and experiences, for the first time, that terrible moment of killing a human being. The fight is brief, perhaps 5 minutes, perhaps less. Violence in reality is not like the movies. It's exhausting, terrifying, chaotic. Men fall, wounded, dying, screaming. The psychological impact is devastating to both sides. And then, suddenly, it's over. The strangers break, run, fleeing into the forest, leaving their wounded, their dead, their claim to the valley. When it's over, the first strategist stands among the bodies, breathing hard, covered in blood, his and others. 3 men from his band are dead. One of them his cousin, a man he hunted with, laughed with, trusted with his life. 5 more are wounded, one seriously, may not survive. On the enemy side, 3 dead, several wounded, dragged away by their fleeing comrades. The victory tastes like ashes, but the valley is theirs, and the first strategist, standing among the bodies, feels something complex, horror at the loss, grief for the dead, physical revulsion at the violence, but also something else, pride, respect from his people, a new kind of power, a new kind of status. The women look at him differently, with fear, yes, but also respect, admiration even. The men follow his orders more quickly, more completely than before. He has become the first military leader, the first person whose primary source of power comes from organized violence. The old woman of the band, the healer, tends the wounded and speaks. This will happen again. Other bands will hear. They will come to test us or to avoid us. She's right. Word spreads. Through the invisible networks of human communication, meeting bands, sharing stories, warning or boasting. The River Valley Band, they fought, they killed, they are dangerous. And in that moment, warfare enters the human toolkit, permanently, because it worked. Violence, organized violence, achieved the objective, secured resources, established dominance. And humans, being the learning creatures we are, would never forget this lesson. But more than that, this first battle created something new, a social role, a type of status that didn't exist before. The warrior, the military leader, the man whose power comes from organized violence. This role will evolve, will become more complex, more specialized, more central to human societies. But it starts here in this moment, with the first strategist standing among the dead, covered in blood, feeling the weight of leadership, the burden of victory, the cost of power. Over the next 1,000 years, warfare spreads like a virus or like agriculture. Depending on your perspective, bands that practice it survive better, expand, displace bands that don't. Not always through violence, sometimes through intimidation, through reputation, through the mere threat of violence. But the result is the same. Warfare becomes universal, a human universal practiced by every society, in every land, in every era. At Çatalhöyük, in Turkey, 9,000 years ago, archaeologists find no weapons, no fortifications, no evidence of warfare. A peaceful society, egalitarian, cooperative, but by 7,000 years ago, warfare reaches even there. Walls appear, weapons proliferate. Peace ends. Why? Because once warfare exists, in neighboring groups, You must either adopt it or be conquered by those who have. This is the tragedy and the logic of military evolution. You don't have to like warfare, don't have to want it, don't have to think it's moral or right. But if your neighbors have mastered it and you haven't, you're vulnerable, threatened, likely to be absorbed or destroyed. And so warfare spreads, not because humans are inherently violent, though we are, but because of game theory, because of strategic necessity, because of the inexorable logic of competitive evolution. But something else happens, too. Warfare changes human cognition, changes how we think, how we organize, how we see the world. To wage war effectively, you need to think abstractly about groups, about strategy, about future consequences. You need to plan, to coordinate, to communicate complex ideas, to maintain discipline over time. Archaeological evidence suggests that around this period, human symbolic thinking explodes. Cave paintings become more sophisticated. Tools become more standardized. Trade networks expand. Some researchers believe there's a connection. That warfare, terrible as it is, pushed human intelligence, forced us to develop new cognitive capabilities, new forms of social organization, to outthink the enemy, to coordinate larger groups, to plan more complex operations. This is uncomfortable to contemplate, that something so destructive might have contributed to human cognitive development. But evolution doesn't care about our comfort, only about what works, what survives, what reproduces. And societies that develop better warfare through better thinking, better organization, better strategy, survived, while those that didn't vanished from history, leaving no descendants, no stories, no trace, except bones in the ground and questions in the minds of archaeologists. 10,000 years later. Chapter 2. The organization of violence. Slowly, over millennia. Warfare evolves. Bands become tribes. Tribes become chiefdoms. Chiefdoms become kingdoms. And warfare grows with them, becomes more complex, more organized, more deadly. By 8,000 years ago, something remarkable happens. Humans invent agriculture, and agriculture changes everything, because agriculture creates surplus. For the first time in human history, some people can produce more food than they need to survive. This seems like it should reduce warfare, right? More food for everyone, less scarcity, less reason to fight. But the opposite happens. Warfare intensifies, becomes more common, more organized, more destructive. Why? Because surplus creates something worth stealing, creates something worth protecting, creates inequality, creates classes, creates power structures. And power structures need defending. Let me take you to Jericho, 8,000 years before the Common Era. The first walled city. Imagine the labor required to build these walls, cut in stone from quarries, hole in it, sometimes miles, shaping it, stacking it. Year after year, generation after generation, the walls grow 10 feet high, then 20, thick enough that men can walk atop them. This represents tens of thousands of hours of labor diverted from food production, from daily survival. Think about what this means psychologically. Someone looked at the landscape and thought, we need protection, permanent protection from other humans, not from animals, not from natural disasters, from other people. and that someone had enough authority, enough power to convince hundreds of people to spend years of their lives building walls. This is warfare, even without a battle. The psychology of defense, the assumption of future conflict, the investment of resources into military infrastructure, the walls of Jericho, stand silent testimony to a fundamental shift in human psychology. We now live with the permanent expectation of war. We now organize our societies around the assumption that violence is coming, and this assumption becomes self-fulfilling because once one city has walls, others must build them too, or risk being seen as weak, as vulnerable, as targets. An arms race begins 5,000 years before anyone coined the term, around 3000 BCE. In the Near East, humans discover how to work bronze, tin and copper melted together, create an alloy, harder than either metal alone, sharp enough to hold an edge, tough enough to withstand impact. The Bronze Age begins, and with it, warfare transforms again. Because bronze weapons are expensive, require specialized knowledge, controlled resources, organized production. A bronze sword represents months of labor, specialized mining, smelting, forging, finishing. Not everyone can afford one. Not everyone can make one. And so, military power becomes concentrated in the hands of those who control bronze production, bronze trade, bronze distribution. The first military elites emerge, warriors who can afford bronze armor, bronze weapons, who practice daily with these expensive tools, while farmers, craftsmen, common people make do with stone, wood, or leather. This economic division creates a military division, which reinforces the social division. Those who control violence control society. This pattern will repeat throughout history with iron, with steel, with gunpowder, with nuclear weapons. Military technology that requires specialized knowledge and expensive resources, concentrates power, creates hierarchies, shapes societies. By 5,000 years ago, in Mesopotamia, in the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, something new emerges. The first true armies, not raiding parties, not bands of warriors, but organized, trained, professional soldiers. The Sumerians, living in city-states like Uruk, Lagash, develop warfare into an art form. They create formations, the phalanx, where soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears projecting forward. This requires training, discipline, trust. Each man must hold his position, even under attack, even when terrified, because breaking the line means everyone dies. The Sumerian kings understand something profound, that organized violence beats disorganized violence. Every time, 10 disciplined men can defeat 20 undisciplined men. 100 men who trust each other, who've trained together, who move as one, can defeat 500 individuals. This is the mathematics of warfare that will govern battle for the next 5,000 years. Organization multiplies effectiveness, discipline multiplies courage, training multiplies skill. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon rises to power, born a commoner, perhaps even a slave. He becomes cupbearer to the king of Kish. Then, through means historians debate, he seizes power, creates his own city, Akkad, and then he does something no one has ever done before. He conquers everything, every city-state in Mesopotamia, creating the First Empire, the Akkadian Empire, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. But what was the innovation really? Not weapons. The Sumerians had those, not tactics. The Sumerians had fought for centuries, but psychology and organization. Sargon understood that to control an empire, you need men who will obey, consistently, predictably, even unto death. And so he created the first military hierarchy, the first professional stand-in army, men who are soldiers, first and always, not farmers who fight seasonally. He organizes them in units, tens, hundreds, thousands, each with clear chains of command. Officers who lead tens report to officers who lead hundreds, who report to generals, who report to Sargon. This structure, this pyramid of authority, becomes a template for every army that follows for the next 5,000 years. But why do men obey? This question echoes through all of military history. Why does a soldier follow orders that might kill him? Let me take you deeper into this psychology. First, there's training, the deliberate breaking down of individual will, the rebuilding of group identity. Sargon's recruits, taken young, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, removed from their families, placed in barracks with other boys. They eat together, sleep together, train together for years. Their individual identity slowly erodes, replaced by unit identity. You are not yourself. You are the third company. You are a spear carrier of Akkad. You carry a standard blessed by victories, by the blood of your predecessors. Second, there's peer pressure, the most powerful force in human psychology. The man beside you is your brother now, closer than blood. You've trained with him, eaten with him, survived with him. You cannot let him down. You cannot show cowardice in front of those who matter most. Studies of modern combat consistently show that soldiers fight, not for nation, not for ideology, but for their squad, for the men directly beside them. This was true in Sargon's army, 5,000 years ago, as it is today. Third, there's the abstract, loyalty to king, to city, to gods, to ideals larger than self. Sargon cultivates this deliberately, with propaganda, with ceremonies, with religious rituals. Before battle, priests bless the troops, invoke the gods, frame the coming violence as sacred duty. The soldier fights, not just for Sargon, but for the god Enlil, for cosmic order, for civilization itself. And finally, there's the brutal calculus that disobeying might mean execution, while obeying might mean survival. Sargon's officers have authority to execute cowards, deserters, anyone who breaks formation. The soldier knows running from the enemy might kill him. Running from his own officers will definitely kill him. So he stands, he fights, he obeys. Not from courage alone, though courage matters, but from this complex web of psychological forces, all pushing him toward obedience. Sargon understood all of this intuitively, or perhaps through trial and error, and so his armies marched from city to city, conquering, absorbing, creating the first empire, not through superior weapons, but through superior psychology, superior organization, superior discipline. In Egypt, along the Nile, warfare takes on a different character. The geography shapes everything. Egypt is a ribbon of green, surrounded by desert, protected by natural barriers, relatively secure from invasion. And so Egyptian warfare focuses less on defense, more on expansion, on projecting power beyond their borders. The pharaohs, divine kings, living gods on earth, wage war not just for resources, but for cosmic order. When Pharaoh Thutmose III campaigns in Syria, 17 campaigns over 20 years, he's not just conquering territory, he's restoring Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of universal order, balance, rightness, harmony. The Egyptians believe that chaos threatens always at the borders, that foreign lands represent disorder, that Pharaoh must constantly push back chaos, restore order. This is crucial to understand. Warfare, from early on, is wrapped in ideology, in religious justification, in the belief that violence serves a higher purpose, because humans need meaning, need justification, need to believe that killing is somehow noble, necessary, righteous. The Egyptian soldier marching north into Canaan, carrying his bronze-tipped spear, wearing his linen armor, isn't just following orders. He's serving the gods, maintaining cosmic balance, participating in something sacred, ensuring that the sun rises tomorrow, that the Nile floods on schedule, that order prevails over chaos. This psychological framework makes warfare possible, makes it bearable, makes men willing to die, and every civilization that follows will develop its own version of this sacred military psychology. Let me tell you about one specific battle, because specifics reveal what generalizations hide. In 1457 BCE, Thutmose III faces a coalition of Canaanite kings at Megiddo. The Egyptian army, perhaps 10,000 men, marches north from Egypt. They face a choice: 3 routes to Megiddo, 2 safe but slow, 1 dangerous but fast. The dangerous route, the Aruna Pass, is narrow, winding, treacherous. If the enemy holds the far end, the Egyptian army will be slaughtered, trapped in the pass, unable to deploy. Thutmose's generals advise, take the safe route. Don't risk everything. But Thutmose understands psychology. If we take the dangerous route, the enemy won't expect it. We achieve surprise. More than that, our own troops will see that we're brave, that we take risks, that we lead from the front, and the enemy will see the same and feel fear. So Thutmose takes a dangerous route, personally leads the way, and emerges safely. The enemy having not anticipated this move. The Battle of Megiddo itself is brief. The psychological advantage, overwhelming. The Canaanite coalition, seeing the Egyptians emerge from the impossible pass, loses nerve, fights half-heartedly, breaks quickly. This teaches us something profound, that great commanders don't just move armies, they move minds, shape perceptions, create psychological advantages. The battle is won before the fighting starts in the calculations and fears of the enemy's mind. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, modern Turkey, the Hittites develop something new. The chariot, 2 horses, pulling a light platform, carrying 2 or 3 men, 1 to drive, 1 or 2 to fight, fast, mobile, shocking in its impact. The chariot revolutionizes warfare in the Bronze Age. Not because it's inherently superior. Chariots are expensive, difficult to build, require trained horses, trained drivers, open terrain, but because psychologically they're terrifying. Imagine you're a foot soldier standing in formation, and you hear a rumble growing louder. You see dust rising, horses galloping, chariots charging directly at you, the noise, the speed, the mass, the apparent invincibility. Many formations break before contact, simply from fear, from psychological impact. The Hittites understand this, use chariots not just as weapons, but as psychological tools to break enemy morale before the fighting begins. At the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, Hittites face Egyptians, the largest chariot battle in history. Perhaps 5,000 chariots, on both sides, 30,000 men total. The battle is inconclusive militarily, but both sides claim victory. Why? Because warfare is as much about perception, about what people believe happened, as about what actually happened. Rameses II, the Egyptian pharaoh, commissions monuments, inscriptions, declaring total victory. The Hittite king does the same in his capital. And both populations believe their version, believe they won, believe their king is glorious. This is propaganda, psychological warfare aimed not at the enemy, but at your own people, to maintain support, to justify taxation, to enable future wars. By 900 BCE, the Assyrians rise and perfect something new. Psychological warfare. At scale, terror as strategy. The Assyrian army is perhaps the most formidable of the ancient world. Organized in units, with specialized troops, archers, cavalry, siege engineers, infantry. They have iron weapons, superior to bronze, and they've mastered siege warfare, can reduce any city given time. But their true innovation is psychological. They don't just conquer cities, they terrorize them, deliberately, systematically, creating a reputation so fearsome that enemies surrender rather than fight. Listen to their own inscriptions, the kings boasting, "I cut off their heads, I built a pillar of heads before their city, I flayed the nobles, and spread their skins on the piles. I made a pyramid of heads, I impaled them on stakes around the city." Why this horror? Why this cruelty? Not sadism, though that may have played a role, but strategy, cold calculation. If City A falls with horrific consequences, City B, seeing this, hearing the stories, imagining the fate, might surrender without a fight. Terror becomes a military tool, a force multiplier, a way to win without fighting. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who rules 668 to 627 BCE, understands something profound. That reputation spreads faster than armies, that fear can conquer more efficiently than swords, that the human imagination can be weaponized. When his army approaches, cities open their gates, offer tribute, beg for mercy, because the alternative, the stories they've heard, the images they've imagined, are worse than surrender. This is the dark side of military psychology, the realization that human imagination can amplify violence, that the threat of cruelty can be more powerful than cruelty itself. The Assyrians create the first true empire of terror, held together not by loyalty, not by shared culture, but by fear, by the memory of violence, by the threat of its return. It's effective, for a time, but it's also unstable, because fear breeds resentment, resentment breeds rebellion, and when the Assyrian power finally weakens, their empire collapses, quickly, violently. Their capital, Nineveh, falls in 612 BCE. and the conquerors show no mercy, remembering centuries of Assyrian cruelty. This too is a lesson that power built purely on fear is brittle, fragile, vulnerable, because it creates no loyalty, no love, no genuine commitment, only resentment, waiting for opportunity. Chapter 3: The Classical Perfection. Let me take you now to Greece, to a peninsula of mountains and islands, where warfare transforms again. Around 700 BCE, the Greek city-states develop something revolutionary: the hoplite phalanx. Picture it, rows of men, 8 deep, shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, spears bristling forward, moving as one entity. Each man carries a large round shield. The hoplon, bronze-faced, 3 feet across, weighing perhaps 15 pounds, in his right hand a spear, 7 to 9 feet long, iron-tipped, designed for thrusting, not throwing. He wears a bronze helmet, bronze breastplate, bronze greaves on his shins, the panoply, the full armor. All told, 60 to 70 pounds of equipment. Expensive. Very expensive. A full panoply might cost as much as a small farm, represent a year's income for an average family. This is important, crucial, because it means only citizens with property can afford to be hoplites, and this creates a revolutionary connection between military service and political rights. The Greek city-states, especially Athens, develop a new concept: citizenship through military service. To be a citizen, to vote in the assembly, to participate in democracy, you must fight. You must own your own armor. You must stand in the phalanx. This creates something psychologically profound. Men fighting, not for a king, not for gods alone, but for each other, for their city, for their right to participate in self-governance. In the phalanx, every man is equal, at least in theory. Every position matters equally. Break the line anywhere, and everyone dies. The richest merchant stands beside the poorest farmer who can afford armor. Your shield protects the man on your left. His shield protects you. This teaches interdependence, civic duty, the subordination of individual glory to collective success. It's warfare as democracy, democracy as warfare, each reinforcing the other. The soldier who fights deserves a voice. The citizen who votes must be willing to fight. This connection between rights and responsibilities, between participation and sacrifice, shapes Western political thought. For the next 2,000 years, in 490 BCE, this system faces its greatest test. The Persians, the great empire of the East, invade Greece. King Darius sends perhaps 25,000 men across the Aegean to punish Athens for supporting Greek rebels in Asia Minor. They land at Marathon, a plain northeast of Athens, perfect cavalry country. The Athenians face a choice. They have perhaps 10,000 hoplites, outnumbered, facing the greatest army in the world, on terrain that favors the enemy. Some argue for staying behind Athens' walls, waiting for help from Sparta, but Miltiades, the Athenian general, argues for battle, for immediate action. Why? Not because he's confident of victory, the odds are terrible, but because he understands psychology. If we wait, if we show fear, morale will collapse. Our citizens will lose faith. Panic might spread. Better to fight, to show courage, to die with honor if we must, than to cower behind walls. The Athenians march to Marathon and form their phalanx. And here, Miltiades makes a brilliant tactical choice. He weakens his center, strengthens his wings, creating a concave formation. When the armies meet, the Persian center advances, pushing back the weak Athenian center. The Persians think they're winning. They push forward, pursuing, breaking formation. But the strong Athenian wings wheel inward, encircling the Persian center, crushing it between two walls of bronze and iron. The Persians break, flee to their ships, leave 6,000 dead on the field. The Athenians lose 192 men. But the victory is more than military, it's psychological, transformative. The Greeks learn that the Persians can be beaten, that courage and discipline can overcome numbers, that freedom is worth fighting for. This belief, this confidence will carry them through the even greater crisis that's coming. 10 years later, 480 BCE, the Persians return, this time with everything. King Xerxes brings perhaps 200,000 men, the largest army ever assembled, to conquer Greece permanently. The Greeks unite, barely, forming an alliance led by Sparta and Athens. At Thermopylae, the hot gates, a narrow pass between mountains and sea, 300 Spartans, plus perhaps 7,000 other Greeks, hold the pass for 3 days. They know they're going to die. A traitor has shown the Persians a path around the mountains. Encirclement is inevitable. King Leonidas, the Spartan king, sends away the other Greeks, keeps only his 300, and they fight until every single one is dead. Why? To buy time. Yes. To let the Greek fleet escape. To let Athens evacuate. But also for something deeper. To demonstrate to all of Greece what Spartan courage looks like. To inspire. To shame others into bravery. To create a story. A legend. A psychological weapon. The 300 become immortal, not despite their death, but because of it. Their sacrifice inspires all of Greece, stiffens resistance, turns defeat into a rallying cry. This is the power of sacrifice, of martyrdom, when it's chosen, when it's meaningful, when it's witnessed. A few hundred men, dying well, can inspire millions. Later that year, at Salamis, the Greek fleet faces the Persian fleet in a narrow strait. Themistocles, the Athenian leader, tricks Xerxes into fighting there, in confined waters where Persian numbers mean nothing. The Greek triremes, smaller, more maneuverable, ram and sink Persian ships, one after another. Xerxes watches, from a throne on the shore, watches his fleet destroyed, watches his invasion crumble, and he learns what the Athenians learned at Marathon. That will matter more than numbers, that terrain matters more than size, that psychology trumps logistics. The Persian wars end, not with the destruction of Persia, but with the liberation of Greece. And the Greeks learned something dangerous, something intoxicating, that they are special, that their way of fighting, their way of governing, is superior. This belief, this arrogance, will lead them into 50 years of warfare against each other, the Peloponnesian War, where Athens and Sparta tear Greece apart, proving that courage without wisdom is just another form of destruction. Let me take you deeper into Sparta, because Sparta represents the ultimate expression of military psychology shaping society. Imagine a city-state where everything Every institution, every custom, every law serves one purpose: producing warriors, Spartan boys, taken from their mothers at age 7, placed in the agog, the training system. They live in barracks, eat communal meals of black broth, sleep on hard beds, train constantly in combat, endure ritual beatings, competitions, hardships designed to build toughness. At age 12, they're given one cloak for the entire year, summer and winter. They're encouraged to steal food, not because Sparta is poor, but to teach resourcefulness, cunning, the willingness to break rules for survival. If caught, they're beaten, not for stealing, but for getting caught, for incompetence. At age 20, if they pass all tests, they join a mess, a dining group of perhaps 15 men who will be their brothers, their family for life. These men eat together, sleep in barracks together, fight together. For the next 30 years, the bond between them becomes stronger than family, stronger than marriage, stronger than life itself. Why this system? Because Sparta, tiny Sparta, perhaps 8,000 citizens, controls a population of perhaps 200,000 helots, slaves, who work the land, produce the food, serve the masters. The ratio is terrifying. 1 Spartan for every 25 helots. If the helots revolt, Sparta dies. And so, every year, Sparta declares war on the helots, ritually, symbolically, to maintain the psychology of dominance. Young Spartans, in the Crypteia, the secret police, go out at night and kill helots, randomly, to spread terror, to remind everyone who's in charge. This is a society built entirely on military psychology, on the maintenance of fear, on the cultivation of warrior identity, on the subordination of everything to martial excellence. And it works for a time. Spartan hoplites are the best in Greece, feared by everyone. Their reputation alone, often enough to win battles before they begin. But there's a cost. Sparta produces no philosophy, no art, no literature, no innovation. All creative energy, all intellectual capacity, funneled into one thing: warfare. And when they finally lose, at Leuctra in 371 BCE, defeated by Thebes using new tactics, Sparta never recovers, because their entire identity, their whole society, was built on martial superiority. When that's gone, nothing remains. This is the danger of total militarization, that a society can become so focused on warfare that it loses the ability to be anything else. And then, from the north, comes something new. Philip II of Macedon becomes king of a backward, fractured kingdom in 359 BCE. Within 20 years, he will dominate all of Greece, revolutionize warfare, and set the stage for his son to conquer the known world. Philip's innovation is the professional army. Before Philip, Greek armies were citizen militias, farmers who fought part-time, during summer, when fields didn't need tending. Philip creates an army that trains year-round, fights as a profession, perfects their craft through constant practice. The Macedonian phalanx uses longer spears, sarissas, 18 feet long, held with both hands. The front 5 ranks can all point their spears forward, creating a bristling hedge of iron, impossible to penetrate. Behind the phalanx, Philip develops the companion cavalry, elite horsemen, led by the king himself. used as a shock force to shatter enemy formations. But the real innovation is in thinking. Philip sees warfare as a system where different units, infantry, cavalry, archers, siege engines, all work together. Where before, Greek warfare was about the clash of phalanxes, straightforward, simple. Philip's battles are complex, multi-phase, requiring coordination, timing, adaptable thinking. He trains his officers to understand the system, to make decisions, to coordinate without direct orders. This is revolutionary. The beginning of modern military staff systems, where commanders don't just give orders, they cultivate judgment in their subordinates. And then Philip dies, assassinated, and his son Alexander becomes king at age 20. Alexander the Great, one of history's most successful military commanders, never loses a battle, conquers the Persian Empire, reaches India, dies at 32, having changed the world. But what made Alexander great? Let's go deeper into his psychology. First, he's trained from childhood by Aristotle, taught to think systematically, to analyze, to see patterns. Second, he's raised on Homer, on the Iliad, taught to see himself as Achilles, to value glory over life, to seek immortality through deeds. Third, he leads from the front, personally charges with the companion cavalry, risks his life repeatedly, is wounded multiple times. This creates absolute loyalty, because his men see he asks nothing of them, he doesn't ask of himself. But fourth, and most important, he has something rare, a quality we might call strategic vision, the ability to see the entire battlefield as a system, as moving parts, as opportunities. At the Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BCE, Alexander faces Darius III, the Persian king. The Persian army is enormous, perhaps 200,000 men, outnumbering Alexander 5-1. They have cavalry, chariots, elephants, every advantage. Darius chooses the battlefield, flattens it for his chariots, prepares carefully. Alexander arrives, surveys the field, and sees something. Darius, in the center, surrounded by his best troops, the immortals. If the center advances, gaps will open. On the flanks, Alexander's plan is psychological more than tactical. He feints, threatens the flanks, forces Darius to extend his line, stretch his forces thin. Then, at the decisive moment, Alexander personally leads the companion cavalry in a wedge formation, directly at the gap, directly at Darius. The charge is terrifying. Alexander in front, visible, identifiable, heading straight for the Persian king. Darius, seeing Alexander coming, seeing the cavalry wedge crashing through his guards, panics, flees. And when the king flees, the entire Persian army loses cohesion, morale collapses, they run. Alexander wins, not through superior numbers, not through better equipment, but through seeing the psychological vulnerability, the moment of opportunity, and striking decisively. This is military genius, not supernatural, but psychological. The ability to read minds, to see fear, to exploit hesitation, to turn the enemy's psychology against them. After Gaugamela, Persia falls, not because Alexander destroys every Persian army, but because he destroys Persian confidence, Persian belief in their own power. He becomes, in the minds of his enemies, inevitable, unstoppable, fated to win, and belief shapes reality. Fear becomes self-fulfilling. Cities open their gates rather than face him. Commanders surrender rather than fight. The Persian Empire crumbles, as much from psychological collapse as from military defeat. But Alexander dies young. His empire fragments, and in the West, a new power rises. Rome, a city-state in Italy, that will become the greatest military power the ancient world ever knew. Let me take you to Rome in 300 BCE, a republic, governed by the Senate, but constantly at war with neighboring tribes, with other Italian cities, with anyone who threatens Roman interests. The Roman army, at this point, is still a citizen militia, similar to the Greek model, but it's evolving, developing systems that will make it unstoppable. The legion replaces the phalanx as the primary formation, where the phalanx is rigid. Designed to fight head-on, the legion is flexible, can maneuver, can respond to terrain, to circumstances. The legion divides into maniples, small units of perhaps 120 men that can act independently. These maniple arrange in checkerboard formation, allowing units to support each other, to rotate in and out of combat, to maintain fresh troops in the front line. This is revolutionary because it means Roman armies can fight longer, can sustain combat, can wear down enemies who use traditional formations. But more important than tactics, it is psychology, is system, is the Roman approach to warfare. Let me take you inside the mind of a Roman legionary in 200 BCE. He enlists at 17, signs up for 16 years of service, later extended to 25 years, a lifetime of commitment. In exchange, he receives pay, regular pay, perhaps 300 denarii per year, enough to live on. He receives regular meals, grain rations, meat when available, something many poor Romans can't count on. He receives training, daily training, in weapons, in formations, in engineering, in skills that make him valuable. And at the end, if he survives, he receives a discharge bonus, either in cash or land, enough to set him up for the rest of his life. This is delayed gratification. As military strategy, the legion works because individual soldiers can sacrifice their present for a guaranteed future. The Roman state honors this contract, almost always, pays on time, delivers the promised rewards. This creates trust. The soldier knows if he serves faithfully, he'll be taken care of. But the training, the daily training, is where the real magic happens, every day. Whether in combat season or winter quarters, the legionary practices. The same sword strikes, the gladius, the short sword, designed for stabbing, not slashing. The same shield movement, the scutum, the rectangular shield used for both defense and attack. The same formations, marching in step, turning together, responding to trumpet calls. Over and over, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, until thought disappears, until the body acts, without the mind's permission, in battle, when chaos reigns, when fear overwhelms, when rational thought becomes impossible. The legionary's body remembers. His training bypasses the conscious mind, accesses muscle memory, unconscious reactions, and he performs automatically, reliably, predictably. This is how Rome conquers, through reliability, through the certainty that each soldier will do exactly what's expected, under any circumstance. In 218 BCE, Rome faces its greatest test. Hannibal Barca, The Carthaginian general invades Italy with an army including war elephants, crosses the Alps in winter, a feat considered impossible. He lands in northern Italy and proceeds to destroy every Roman army sent against him at Lake Trasimene. He ambushes a Roman army in fog, kills 15,000 men. At Cannae, 216 BCE, he faces the largest army Rome has ever fielded, perhaps 80,000 men, and he defeats them utterly in what becomes the most studied battle in history. Hannibal's tactic, the double envelopment, deliberately weakens his center, strengthens his wings. The Romans, seeing the weak center, push forward, confident, thinking they're winning. The Carthaginian center retreats slowly in good order, drawing the Romans deeper, and then the strong Carthaginian wings wheel inward, the cavalry circles behind, and the Romans are surrounded, completely encircled. 80,000 Romans, in a space too small to fight effectively, crushed together, can't use their weapons, can't maneuver, helpless. 50,000 die in a single afternoon. Perhaps 10% of all Roman military-age males. It's the worst defeat in Roman history. Should be the end, should break Roman will, but it doesn't. This is where Roman psychology shines. The Senate refuses to negotiate, refuses to admit defeat, raises new legions, and continues the war. For 16 years, Hannibal remains in Italy, undefeated in battle, but unable to break Roman will. Because Rome fights with systems, with depth, with the ability to absorb losses and continue. They fight with patience, refusing to meet Hannibal in open battle after Cannae, just shadowing him, harassing, waiting. And finally, they take the war to Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal to return to defend his homeland at Zama in 202 BCE. Scipio Africanus, the Roman general, defeats Hannibal using tactics learned from Hannibal himself. Rome wins, not through superior tactics, not through better generals, but through superior systems, through deeper reserves, through absolute refusal to quit. This is the Roman way, not brilliant, not innovative, but relentless, systematic, inevitable, like a glacier moving slowly, crushing everything in its path through sheer mass and patience. Chapter 4. The medieval transformation. Rome falls. Slowly, like a great tree, rot spreading from within, branches dying one by one, finally toppling. In the year 476, the Western Roman Empire ends, not with a great battle, not with a climactic siege, but with a whimper. The last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a boy, is deposed by a Germanic chieftain, and Rome, the eternal city, becomes just another city, and warfare transforms again. The professional armies disappear. The legions that maintained order for 5 centuries dissolved, their systems forgotten, their discipline lost, replaced by something older, more personal, more bound to land and loyalty. The feudal system emerges slowly, over centuries, as a response to chaos, to the breakdown of central authority. In this new world, military service is tied to land ownership, to oaths of personal loyalty, to a hierarchical structure that mirrors heaven itself, God at the top, angels below, humans below them, each in their proper place, each owing service and obedience to those above. The knight becomes the ideal warrior, not a professional soldier, but a member of the nobility, trained from childhood. In the arts of war, bound by codes of honor that make death preferable to shame. Let me take you into the life of a knight to understand the psychology. A boy born to nobility begins training at age 7, sent away from his mother to another lord's household. He becomes a page, serving meals, learning manners, learning horsemanship, beginning weapons training. At 14, he becomes a squire, a personal servant to a knight, caring for weapons and armor, accompanying his master to battle, learning through observation and experience. The training is brutal, exhausting, designed to create both physical and mental toughness. Hours of sword practice until arms shake, until blisters bleed, until the weight of mail armor feels like nothing. Jousting practice, charging at targets with lances, falling hard, getting back up, learning that pain is temporary, that courage is essential. And through it all, the code, chivalry, drilled into his mind until it becomes his identity. A knight is brave, never shows fear, never retreats, fights fairly, shows mercy to worthy opponents, protects the weak, serves his lord faithfully, honors his word above his life. These aren't just guidelines, they're identity. They're the definition of what it means to be worthy, to be human. At 21, if he proves himself, he's knighted in a religious ceremony that makes clear his duty to God, to his Lord, to his honor. The dubbing, a blow to the shoulder with a sword, the last blow he'll receive unanswered. From this moment, he is a knight, part of an exclusive fraternity, a warrior elite, whose opinion of him matters more than life itself. Why did knights fight? The answer reveals something profound about human motivation. Knights fought for honor, for glory, for reputation, for the respect of their peers, not for money. Though plunder existed, not for land, though that mattered, but for something intangible, something psychological, the opinion of other knights. Medieval warfare at the knightly level became almost theatrical, ritualized. Governed by elaborate rules, you challenged your equal, announced your identity, fought fairly, showed mercy to worthy opponents, ransomed prisoners rather than killing them, followed the codes of chivalry. Why? Because knights were a club, a fraternity, an exclusive group, where membership was everything. To be called cowardly, to lose honor, to be shunned by your peers was worse than death, because it meant expulsion from the only group that mattered. This is human psychology at its most pure. We are social creatures. We need belonging. We need respect. We need to know our place in a hierarchy. And the medieval military system exploited this need, turned it into motivation, into courage, into willingness to die. For what? For words, for reputation, for the opinion of other men. And yet, this motivated knights to incredible feats of courage, of endurance, of sacrifice. A knight would charge alone against impossible odds, because being called coward by his peers was worse than death. He would honor his word even when it cost him everything, because breaking an oath meant losing honor, losing identity, losing self. This psychology, this honor culture, makes medieval warfare both more humane in some ways and more brutal in others. More humane because knights often spared each other, fought with rules, treated worthy opponents with respect. More brutal because honor demanded, that insults be answered with violence, that reputation be defended, that mercy to unworthy opponents, peasants, commoners, was unnecessary. But the knightly ideal existed alongside a harsher reality. Most medieval combat wasn't glorious charges, wasn't heroic duels, but something else entirely. Raids, ambushes, sieges, the slow grinding of economic warfare. A knight and his retainer would descend on an enemy's lands, burn crops, kill livestock, drive off peasants, destroy the economic base that supported enemy armies. This seems dishonorable, unheroic, and yet it was standard practice. Because medieval warfare was as much about economics as about combat. If you destroy your enemy's harvest, he can't feed his soldiers, can't sustain a campaign, must make peace. Warfare becomes a tool of policy, of economic pressure, of psychological coercion. But while the knights pursued glory, most medieval warfare was something else entirely. Sieges, the patient, grinding, exhausting, warfare of attrition. An army arrives, surrounds a castle, and waits. Weeks become months, months become seasons. Both sides settle into routine, boredom, punctuated by brief violence, then more waiting. Let me take you into a medieval siege to understand the psychology. In 1203, King Philip II of France besieges Chateau Gaillard, Richard the Lionheart's greatest castle, built to be impregnable. The castle sits on a cliff above the Seine, surrounded by 3 walls, with a garrison of perhaps 200 men, provisioned for months. Philip arrives with perhaps 6,000 men and settles in. He can't storm the walls, they're too strong, too high, too well defended. So he waits. This is the psychology of the siege. Patience, grinding patience. For the attackers, life becomes a routine. Building siege works, maintaining supplies, drilling, training, and waiting. The psychological challenge is maintaining discipline, preventing desertion, keeping men focused on an objective that seems endlessly distant. Philip addresses this by paying regularly, by ensuring food supply, by creating a routine that gives structure to the waiting. He also slowly tightens the noose, builds siege towers, brings up trebuchets, massive catapults that hurl stones day and night, smashing walls, grinding stone. The sound alone is psychologically devastating. Constant impact, reminding defenders that pressure never stops. For the defenders, psychology is different. They must maintain hope, must believe relief is coming, must ration not just food but optimism. At first, morale is high. Provisions are good. The castle is strong. But weeks pass. No relief comes. Supplies dwindle. Stomachs growl. 3 months in. Starvation begins. The garrison faces choices. Terrible choices. They expel the non-combatants, women, children, elderly, those who eat but can't fight. These people, perhaps 500 of them, walk out the gates, expecting to pass through Philip's lines, to go home. But Philip refuses to let them pass. They're trapped between the castle and the siege lines. No food, no shelter, slowly starving. The defenders can hear them, their former neighbours, crying, begging, dying. This is psychological warfare of the cruelest kind. Philip makes the defenders listen to people die, knowing they expelled them, knowing they could end this by surrendering. After a month, most of the civilians are dead. Philip finally lets the survivors through. The garrison, traumatized, weakened, running out of food, finally surrenders after 6 months. The castle, considered impregnable, falls not to assault but to patience, to psychological pressure, to the slow grinding of will. This is medieval warfare, not glorious, not heroic, but effective, inevitable, like water wearing away stone. And then, in 1095, Pope Urban II stands before a council at Clermont and calls for a crusade. Deus vult, the crowd shouts. God wills it. Thousands of men take the cross, sew it onto their clothing, march east to fight for God, to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. The First Crusade succeeds, against all odds, capturing Jerusalem in 1099, establishing Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land. But why? What motivates men to leave home, march thousands of miles, fight in foreign lands, for a city most will never see? The motivations are complex, layered, revealing. Some seek salvation. Pope Urban promises that crusaders who die in holy war go directly to heaven, sins forgiven. Paradise guaranteed. For medieval Christians who believe deeply in hell's eternal torment, in the need for salvation, this is powerful motivation. Some seek adventure, escape from ordinary life, a chance to see the world beyond their village, to be part of something larger, something historical. Some seek land, wealth, opportunity in the East. Primogeniture means second and third sons inherit nothing. The crusade offers a path to property, to status. And some truly believe in the righteousness of their cause, in the necessity of reclaiming holy sites, in fighting for God. The Crusades teach us that ideology can be the most powerful military motivator. When men fight for God, for faith, for cosmic significance, they endure hardships that would break armies fighting for mere territory. The Crusaders march across Europe, cross Anatolia, besiege Antioch for 8 months, survive starvation, cannibalism, disease, and when they finally reach Jerusalem in July 1099 and breach the walls, they fight with apocalyptic fury. The chronicles describe rivers of blood, streets carpeted with corpses, killing that goes on for days. This isn't just military victory, it's holy war. It's the channeling of religious fervor into military violence, and it shows the dark side of ideological warfare, that when you convince men they fight for God, for absolute truth, for cosmic good, they become capable of extraordinary violence, because the enemy isn't just human. The enemy is evil, is heresy, is Satan's agent. Compromise becomes impossible. Mercy becomes weakness. Genocide becomes righteous, while Europe wrestles with Christianity and chivalry. In the East, a different military culture emerges. The Mongols, under Genghis Khan, conquer the largest land empire in history, from China to Hungary, from Siberia to India. Their methods are worth understanding. As a contrast to European warfare, the Mongols fight without honor codes, without chivalry, without mercy. They fight for absolute victory, for total submission, for terror as strategy. Cities that resist are massacred. Every single person killed. Pyramids of skulls, left as warnings. Cities that surrender immediately are spared, allowed to continue under Mongol rule. The message is clear: submit or die. There is no middle ground, no negotiation, no honor to gain from resistance. This is brutally effective. Psychologically, as the Mongol reputation spreads, cities surrender without fighting. Saving the Mongols, the cost of siege, of combat, of time. Fear becomes their greatest weapon, more effective than bows, than cavalry, than tactics. By the time a Mongol army arrives, the psychological battle is already won. Resistance seems futile. Surrender seems wise. The Mongols conquer, not because they are better fighters, though they are, but because they master the psychology of terror, the strategic use of reputation, the weaponization of fear. Compared to European chivalry, with its codes and restrictions, Mongol warfare seems barbaric, immoral, purely practical, but it's devastatingly effective. The largest empire in history, created in a single lifetime, through the systematic application of psychological warfare. Back in Europe, from 1337 to 1453, England and France fight the 100 Years' War, not continuously, but in phases, battles interspersed with truces broken by renewed fighting. This war demonstrates the evolution of medieval warfare, the slow transition towards something new. At Crécy, 1346, English longbowmen defeat French knights through superior firepower and tactical positioning. The English choose their ground on a hill, with flanks protected, and wait. The French charge, uphill, confident in their knightly prowess, certain that armour and courage will prevail. But the English archers can shoot 10 arrows per minute, accurately, penetrating armour at 200 yards. The French knights are slaughtered before they even reach the English lines. This is psychologically devastating to the medieval order, where once military power required years of training, expensive equipment, noble birth. Now a peasant with a few years' practice can kill his betters from a distance, without risk. The nobility resists this, calls it dishonourable, unchivalrous, unfair, because they understand intuitively that it threatens their entire social position. If military power doesn't require noble birth, then what justifies nobility at all? The French king, John II, at the Battle of Poitiers, 1356, watches his army defeated by English archers. Again, he's captured, held for ransom, humiliated. The psychological impact on French knighthood is enormous. Their entire identity, built on military superiority, collapses. They cannot accept that peasants with bows are their equals in combat, and yet the evidence is undeniable. This tension between military effectiveness and social order will recur throughout history. Every military innovation threatens someone's power, someone's status, someone's place in the hierarchy. And so warfare is never just about fighting. It's about maintaining or disrupting social structures. In 1429, the 100 Years' War reaches a crisis point. England controls most of northern France. Paris is occupied. Orléans is besieged. The French cause seems lost. And then, a peasant girl, 17 years old, claims she hears voices from God telling her to save France. Joan of Arc convinces the Dauphin, the uncrowned French king, to give her an army, and she relieves Orleans, wins a series of battles, turns the tide of the war. How? Not through military genius. Her tactics are simple, direct, aggressive, but through psychological impact, through the power of belief, through charisma, through the inspiration she provides, to demoralize French soldiers. She represents something the French army desperately needs: hope, divine favor, the belief that God is on their side. Her presence transforms army morale, soldiers who were ready to desert now fight with fervor, believing they're fighting for a saint, for divine mission. This is the power of psychology, of belief, of meaning. In warfare, Joan doesn't win through tactics. She wins through inspiration, through creating. In her soldiers, the will to win. The English fear her, call her a witch, because they have no other explanation for how a peasant girl can defeat professional soldiers. When she's finally captured and burned as a heretic, the English think they've solved the problem, but her impact is permanent. She's proven that belief matters more than breeding, that courage needs no noble birth, that inspiration can come from anywhere. The French continue fighting, inspired by her memory, and eventually expel the English from France. Joan of Arc demonstrates what we'll see again and again throughout history, that warfare is fought in the mind as much as on the battlefield, that psychology trumps tactics, that belief determines outcomes. While chivalry and longbows dominate Europe, in China, something new is brewing: gunpowder, discovered centuries earlier by Chinese alchemists seeking immortality. The irony is profound. Seeking to extend life, they discover the means to end it more efficiently. Gunpowder reaches Europe by the 13th century, brought along trader routes, or reinvented independently. At first when it's primitive, unreliable, more danger to the user than the enemy. Early guns, hand cannons, are tubes of iron that sometimes explode. Killing the shooter, they're slow to load, inaccurate, unreliable in rain, often failing to fire at all, and yet they represent the future. Because gunpowder does something that no previous technology has done. It democratizes violence. A peasant with a musket needs a few weeks' training and can kill anyone. Noble or commoner, knight or soldier, king or beggar, the armor that took years to make, the training that took decades to master, all become irrelevant, obsolete, worthless. A bullet doesn't care about your breeding, your courage, your honor. It doesn't care that you're a knight, that your family fought for generations, that you've trained since childhood. It just kills. The psychological impact on the nobility is enormous. Their entire identity, their social position, their reason for existing, based on military superiority. And gunpowder renders it meaningless. They resist. Of course they do. Call guns cowardly. Demand they be banned. Appeal to popes and kings. To preserve the old order. But economics and effectiveness win. Guns are cheap to make, to use, to train with. An army of gunmen costs a fraction of an army of knights. And so, slowly, inexorably, gunpowder transforms warfare. The armored knight becomes obsolete, disappears from the battlefield, relegated to tournaments, ceremonial roles, nostalgic memory, and warfare becomes something new, more democratic, more deadly, more industrial. The medieval world is ending, and modernity, gunsmoke and all, is beginning. Chapter 5. The Gunpowder Revolution. Gunpowder arrives in Europe from China and everything changes. Again, slowly at first, early guns are clumsy, unreliable, dangerous to the user. A hand cannon in 1350 is a tube of iron on a wooden stock loaded from the muzzle, lit with a slow match that sometimes explodes, killing the shooter. It takes a minute to load. It's inaccurate beyond 50 yards. It fails to fire in rain. It produces clouds of smoke that blind the shooter. And yet, within 300 years, guns will dominate warfare, will make knights obsolete, will transform armies, will change the nature of state power itself. Why? Because gunpowder does something that no previous technology has done. It democratizes violence, makes killing a matter of pulling a trigger rather than a lifetime of training. But more than that, it changes the psychology of warfare, fundamentally, permanently. Distance is the key, the crucial change. With a sword, with a spear, even with a bow, you see your target as a person, with a face, with fear in their eyes. With humanity, with a gun, you point at a target, pull a trigger, and somewhere, downrange, someone falls. You don't see the moment of impact, the pain, the death. This distance, this removal of the personal, changes how men process violence. It becomes easier, more abstract, less traumatic to kill. Studies of modern combat show that soldiers with rifles are far more likely to fire than soldiers with bayonets, because pulling a trigger from 100 yards doesn't feel like killing a person. It feels like a task, a job, a mechanical action. This psychological shift allows armies to kill at scales previously impossible, when every soldier can fire repeatedly, without hesitation, without the psychological resistance of personal violence. Warfare becomes more deadly, more impersonal, more industrial. By the 1500s, Spain develops the tercio, a new formation, combining pikes and firearms. Picture a square of perhaps 3,000 men, pikemen in the center, musketeers on the flanks. The pikes, 18 feet long, create a hedge, protecting the musketeers from cavalry. The musketeers fire in volleys, organize ranks, taking turns, maintaining constant fire. This combination proves devastatingly effective, dominates European battlefields for a century. But the real innovation isn't tactical, it's organizational, psychological. The tertia requires discipline, training, the ability to stand in formation, under fire, and execute complex maneuvers. This isn't the individual heroism of knights. This is collective discipline, the subordination of self to system. Spanish soldiers train endlessly, march in step, fire on command, reload in sequence, all automatic, all synchronized. They become parts of a machine, a killing machine that operates regardless of individual courage or fear. This is the future of warfare: organization over heroism, system over individual skill. The Spanish dominate Europe, militarily, for a century, not because their soldiers are braver, but because their system is superior. From 1618 to 1648, Europe tears itself apart. In the 30 Years' War, ostensibly about religion, Protestant versus Catholic, but really about power, territory, control. This war destroys Germany, kills perhaps 8 million people, perhaps a third of the population, reduces vast areas to wasteland. Why such devastation? Because warfare has changed. Fundamentally, Armies are larger, tens of thousands of men, needing supplies, food, shelter. They live off the land, taking what they need, destroying what they can't use, leaving ruin behind them. The war drags on, year after year, because neither side can win, but neither will yield. Ideology makes compromise impossible. How do you negotiate out with heretics, with those who threaten your soul's salvation? The 30 Years' War teaches Europe a terrible lesson about ideological warfare, that wars fought for absolute truth, for religious certainty, for cosmic stakes, don't end, don't allow compromise, don't stop until one side is destroyed or exhausted beyond continuing. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648, ends the war, establishes new principles, sovereignty, balance of power, the separation of religion from state affairs. Europe learns that warfare must be limited, must have political objectives, must remain a tool of policy, not an apocalyptic struggle for cosmic truth. This principle, Samo, will govern European warfare for the next 150 years, until ideology returns, with revolution. From the ashes of the 30 Years' War emerges a new model, the professional standing army. Frederick William of Brandenburg, Prussia, creates what becomes a template for modern military organization. He establishes a permanent army, paid regularly, trained constantly, maintained in peacetime as well as war. Other rulers copy this, gradually, hesitantly, because standing armies are expensive and dangerous to their own power, but they're also effective, far more effective than feudal levies, than hired mercenaries, than citizen militias. The professional army introduces something new, career soldiers who fight as a profession, who spend decades mastering their craft, and with professional armies comes professional officers, a military caste who study warfare, write treatises, develop doctrines. War becomes a science, something to be studied, analyzed, systematized. Princes establish military academies to train officers in mathematics, in engineering, in strategy. The Prussian army becomes the model of efficiency, discipline, organization. Frederick the Great, who rules Prussia 1740 to 1786, creates an army of automatons, soldiers who march in perfect step, fire in perfect volleys, maneuver with geometric precision. He famously says, "The common soldier must fear his own officers more than the enemy." This is warfare as mechanism, as clockwork, as pure system, devoid of emotion, of individual will. Soldiers are trained through repetition, through drill, until they obey automatically, without thought, without hesitation. The Prussian method spreads across Europe, becomes the standard for military training, and it works, creates armies of extraordinary discipline, extraordinary effectiveness, but it also creates something troubling, the reduction of humans to parts, to cogs in a machine, valued only for obedience. This tension between effectiveness and humanity will haunt military systems forever after. In 1775, the American colonies rebel against Britain. The Continental Army faces the finest military in the world. The British regulars, professional soldiers, trained in the Prussian method, superbly disciplined. The Americans are militia, farmers, shopkeepers, with minimal training and minimal equipment. They should lose badly, quickly. But they don't. Why? Several reasons, each revealing something about warfare psychology. First, motivation matters. The Americans fight for their homes, their freedom, their future. The British fight because they are ordered to, because it's their job, because they're professionals. When both sides face hardship, the Americans endure because they know why they're fighting. Second, the Americans adapt, use irregular tactics, ambush, hit and run, refusing to fight British strengths. They learn that you don't have to win battles, you just have to not lose, to survive, to make occupation too costly. Third, George Washington understands psychology, understands that keeping the army intact matters more than winning battles. He loses most engagements, but keeps his army together, maintains hope, survives until France enters the war, tips the balance. The American Revolution teaches that motivation can overcome training, that irregular warfare can defeat conventional forces, that survival can become victory if you last longer than your enemies will. In 1789, France erupts in revolution, the monarchy falls, the old order collapses, and warfare transforms again, more radically than ever before. The revolution creates the nation in arms, the concept that every citizen should fight for the nation, the levée en masse, conscription, universal military service, creates armies of unprecedented size. France mobilizes, perhaps 1 million men, dwarfing anything seen before. But more important than numbers is psychology. These soldiers fight not for a king, but for abstract ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity. They fight for the revolution, for the nation, for principles they believe in. This creates extraordinary motivation. Men who charge into cannon fire, singing revolutionary songs, believing they fight for humanity's future. The old professional armies can't match this, can't understand it, can't respond to it. How do you fight an enemy who sees death as martyrdom, who fights for cosmic ideals, who believes history is on their side? The Revolutionary Wars, 1792 to 1802. See France, surrounded by enemies, invaded by all the monarchies of Europe, fighting for survival and winning, not through superior tactics, not through better generals, but through superior will, through the power of ideology, through the transformation of warfare into a struggle for civilization itself. And then, from the chaos of revolution, emerges Napoleon Bonaparte, born in Corsica, trained as an artillery officer, rises through revolutionary meritocracy to become first consul, then emperor, a military genius who understands something fundamental. Warfare has changed, fundamentally, because society has changed. The revolution created citizens willing to fight, not for a king, but for abstract ideals, for the nation, for glory. Napoleon takes this citizen army and applies genius-level strategic thinking. His campaigns from 1796 to 1815 are masterclasses in strategic mobility, concentration of force, exploitation of victory. At Austerlitz, 1805, he faces a larger coalition army, Russian and Austrian, perhaps 85,000 men against his 73,000. He deliberately weakens his right flank, makes it look vulnerable, invites the enemy to attack there. They do, committing their reserves, thinking they've found the decisive point. But Napoleon has hidden his main force, behind a ridge, waiting for the coalition's center to thin out. At the critical moment, his core emerges, smashes through the weakened center, cuts the coalition army in half, destroys it. The genius isn't in the tactic alone. It's in understanding psychology, in creating an illusion of weakness, in exploiting enemy assumptions, in seeing the battle as a system of moving parts. Napoleon sees what others miss, sees opportunities where others see obstacles, sees victory where others see stalemate, but more than tactical brilliance. Napoleon understands something else: momentum. He doesn't just win battles, he exploits victory and he pursues defeated enemies relentlessly, doesn't allow recovery, turns tactical wins into strategic triumphs. After Austerlitz, he doesn't stop. He pursues, destroys coalition armies, forces peace, all within months. This is warfare at speed, using mobility. Psychological impact, the shock of rapid victory to compound advantages. But what drove Napoleon? What motivated this extraordinary man to conquer most of Europe, to crown himself emperor, to risk everything, repeatedly? The answer reveals something about human ambition, about the psychology of greatness. Napoleon is insecure constantly, despite his achievements, always needing more victories, more territory, more glory. He's from minor Corsican nobility, with a thick accent, mocked as a provincial by French aristocrats. He compensates through achievement, through proving himself, again and again, until the whole world acknowledges his greatness. But it's never enough. Victory breeds the need for more victory. Power creates the appetite for more power. This is the psychology of ambition untempered by limits, by satisfaction, by contentment. Napoleon can't stop, because stopping would mean confronting the emptiness beneath the glory. He invades Russia in 1812 with 600,000 men, the largest army ever assembled. Why? Russia isn't threatening him, hasn't attacked, hasn't challenged him directly. But Russia won't fully submit, won't join his continental system, won't acknowledge his supremacy. And Napoleon cannot tolerate this lack of submission, this resistance to his will. So he invades, and the Russian winter, the strategic retreat, the burning of Moscow, destroy his army. He limps back to France with perhaps 20,000 survivors, having lost everything, for nothing but ego. This is the danger of unchecked ambition, that success breeds overconfidence, that victory makes you believe you're invincible, that you can defy nature, luck, reality itself. Napoleon teaches us that even genius has limits, that psychology matters for commanders too, that self-knowledge, humility, acceptance of limits, these are as important as strategic brilliance. The cost of Napoleonic warfare. The Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815 kill perhaps 3 to 6 million people, devastate Europe, drain economies, destroy a generation. Entire regions are depopulated. France loses perhaps 1 million young men. Russia loses even more. And for what? When it's over, when Napoleon finally falls at Waterloo, the map of Europe returns, more or less, to what it was before. All that death, all that suffering, and so little achieved. The Congress of Vienna, 1815, restores the old order, the monarchies, the aristocracy, tries to pretend the revolution never happened, but something has changed, irrevocably. Europe has seen what warfare can become, how destructive, how total, how consuming. And for a century after, Europe tries to prevent it, to keep warfare limited, to maintain balance, to avoid another Napoleon. The Concert of Europe establishes rules, norms, principles for managing conflict without apocalyptic war. It works mostly for a century, until ideology returns, until nationalism rises, until the old systems break down and Europe stumbles, sleepwalking, into the greatest catastrophe in human history. Meanwhile, in America, 1861 to 1865, a civil war erupts, the North versus the South, over slavery, over states' rights, over the nature of the American experiment. This war is the first truly modern war, the first industrial wars previewing what's coming for Europe. Railroads move troops, telegraph coordinates armies, steamships supply forces, factories mass produce weapons, rifled muskets, accurate to 400 yards, make frontal assaults suicidal, force armies into trenches, presage World War I at the Siege of Petersburg, 1864 to 1865. Armies face each other from trenches for 9 months, bombard each other with artillery, launch futile assaults, dig tunnels, detonate mines. This is the future of warfare, and Europe, watching from across the Atlantic, doesn't understand, doesn't learn the lessons, doesn't prepare. The Civil War also demonstrates the power of industrial capacity in modern war. The North has factories, railroads, population, resources. The South has military tradition, better generals initially, higher motivation. Motivation isn't enough. The North can replace losses. The South cannot. The North can equip armies. The South runs out of supplies. By 1865, Southern soldiers fight barefoot, starving, with captured weapons, while the North has surplus equipment. Industrial capacity becomes more important than military skill. Resources matter more than courage. Economies decide wars more than battles. This lesson about total war, about industrial warfare, about the importance of economics, will be relearned bloodily in the world wars. After Napoleon's defeat, Prussia learns lessons the hard way. In 1806, Napoleon destroys the Prussian army at Jena Auerstedt. In a single afternoon, Prussia, the model of military efficiency, the heir to Frederick the Great, is humiliated, occupied, dismembered. This trauma, this humiliation, sparks reform, a complete rethinking of military organization. Gerhard von Scharnhorst and his protégé Karl von Clausewitz revolutionized Prussian military thinking. They establish a general staff system, trained officers who plan, coordinate, study warfare systematically. They institute universal conscription, creating a trained reserve that can expand the army rapidly in wartime. They professionalize officer training, make promotion based on merit, not birth, and most importantly, they study warfare systematically, scientifically. Clausewitz writes, on war, the most influential military treatise ever written. In it, he articulates principles that still govern military thinking today. War is a continuation of politics by other means. Warfare must serve political objectives, must be subordinate to policy, must have purpose beyond mere victory. Everything in war is very simple, but the simplest thing is difficult. The friction of war, the chaos, the unpredictability, makes execution the hardest part. The military genius is composed of intellect and temperament. Great commanders need both strategic thinking and psychological strength to function under stress. These ideas shape military education. For the next 2 centuries, the Prussian system spreads. Other nations copy it, establish staff colleges, study warfare scientifically. By 1870, Prussia defeats France in 6 weeks, using these principles, using mobility, concentration, staff coordination. The Franco-Prussian War demonstrates that modern warfare is about system, about organization, about the effective use of railroads, telegraph, logistics, and every nation watches, learns, prepares for the next war, not knowing that the next war will be beyond anything they imagine, beyond anything humanity has experienced, the war to end all wars, except it won't. Chapter 6: Industrial Warfare and Beyond by 1914. Europe hasn't seen a major war for nearly a century, the longest peace in European history. Since the fall of Rome, nations are prosperous, industrialized, connected by trade and telegraph, by royal marriages and diplomatic conferences. Surely people think, surely war is obsolete, too destructive, too expensive, too irrational for modern civilized nations. And yet, in June 1914, an assassination in Sarajevo triggers a cascade of alliances, mobilization schedules, ultimatums, and within weeks, all of Europe is at war. Nobody planned this. Nobody wanted this. And yet, it happens anyway. Why? Because of systems, of rigid plans, of military timetables that brook no delay. Because of nationalism, the belief that one's nation is superior, destined for greatness, worth dying for. Because of alliances that turn a regional conflict into a global catastrophe. And perhaps most of all, because nobody understood what modern war would actually mean. Let me take you now to the trenches of the First World War, to the Western Front, a scar running across Europe, from Switzerland to the North Sea, where millions of men face each other across mud-filled trenches, separated by barbed wire and machine guns. The trenches are hell on earth. Mud, always mud. Knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep, clinging, sucking, never dry. Rats, feeding on corpses, growing huge, fearless, swarming at night, lice everywhere, in clothes, in hair, biting, carrying disease, impossible to eliminate. The smell of death, of latrines, of unwashed bodies, of gas, permeating everything, the noise, constant. Artillery barrages, machine gun fire, screaming explosions, never silence, never peace. And the fear, constant fear, knowing that today, or tomorrow, or next week, you will be ordered over the top. Let me take you into the mind of a British soldier at the Somme. July 1st, 1916. He's 19 years old, joined up enthusiastically. A year ago. Believe the propaganda about glory and adventure. Now, he crouches in the trench, waiting for the whistle that will send him over the top. For 7 days, British artillery has pounded German lines, firing millions of shells, surely destroying everything. The officers have told them. The Germans are all dead. You'll walk across no man's land. Occupy empty trenches. Easy. But he doesn't believe it. None of them do. They've heard the rumors from other sectors. They've seen what happens. The whistle blows. He climbs a ladder, emerges into daylight, into the open, into no man's land. And immediately, the world explodes with sound, with fire, with death. The German machine guns weren't destroyed. They were in deep bunkers, waiting. Now they open up, with devastating effect, sweeping back and forth, cutting down men like wheat. He sees his friends, falling, torn apart, screaming, dying. Every instinct screams to drop, to hide, to run back. But he's been trained, conditioned. The officers are behind, will shoot deserters. And more than that, his friends are advancing beside him, and he will not show cowardice in front of them. So he walks forward, toward the guns, towards certain death, because the alternative, psychological death, losing the respect of his comrades, is worse. This is a psychology that sustains warfare, even in conditions of absolute horror. Not courage, not patriotism alone, but peer pressure, the need for belonging, the fear of shame, the power of group identity. On the first day of the Somme, the British lose 60,000 casualties, 20,000 dead, in a single day. For gains measured in yards, the worst single day in British military history, and the battle continued for months, grinding men into mud, achieving nothing, breaking a generation. The psychology of trauma. Why didn't they refuse? Why didn't they mutiny? Why didn't they simply stop? This is perhaps the most important question. In all of military history, the answer reveals the depths of military psychology and also the limits of human endurance. First, there's training, the internalization of obedience, the automatic response to orders, drilled in so deeply, it bypasses conscious thought. Second, there's a system, officers behind the lines, military police, executions for cowardice, desertion, mutiny. Britain executes 306 of its own soldiers for cowardice or desertion. During the war, France executes hundreds more, shooting men pour encourager les autres, to encourage the others. Third, there's peer pressure, the impossibility of showing cowardice in front of men whose opinion matters more than life itself. You're not fighting for king or country or abstract ideals. You're fighting for the men in your section, your squad, your trench, who depend on you, who you depend on, who are the only people who understand what you're experiencing. But fourth, and perhaps most important, there's meaning. The soldiers tell themselves story about duty, about sacrifice, about protecting home, about honor. Without these stories, without this psychological framework, the whole system would collapse, because humans cannot endure what they cannot justify, cannot make meaningful, and so they create meaning in the trenches, in the brotherhood, in the shared suffering, in the belief that somehow this sacrifice will lead to a better world. But even with all these psychological supports, men break, shell shock, what we now call PTSD, breaks out epidemic ally, men shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak, unable to function. The military initially treats this as cowardice, as weakness, even executes some men for it. Only slowly. Do they realize this is a psychological wound, as real as a physical injury, caused by the unbearable stress of modern warfare? Thousands of men return home, permanently damaged, unable to work, unable to sleep, unable to escape the memories. This is the cost, the hidden cost, of industrial warfare, the psychological toll, that persists long after the guns fall silent. But World War I teaches us something else, something equally important, that modern warfare requires a total mobilization of society. Women enter factories by the millions, producing weapons, ammunition, supplies, airplanes, ships, in Britain, in France, in Germany. Women work 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions, handling explosives, breathing toxic fumes, doing work previously considered men's work. This has profound social implications. The women prove they can do anything men can, shattering traditional gender roles, paving the way for suffrage, for social change. Governments control economies completely, ration food, manage production, set prices, direct labor, propaganda. The entire society becomes a machine for producing military power, newspapers, posters, films, all work to maintain morale, to justify sacrifice, to demonize the enemy, to keep the machine running. This is a modern warfare, not just armies fighting, but societies competing to sustain violence, longer than the enemy, to bear more pain, more loss, more sacrifice. Victory goes, not to the brave, not to the skilled, but to whoever can endure longest, can mobilize most completely, can sacrifice most deeply. In 1917, Russia collapses from within. The Tsarist regime, unable to sustain the war, unable to feed its people, unable to maintain legitimacy, falls. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seize power, promising peace, land, bread. They withdraw from the war, sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, surrender vast territory, just to achieve peace. This teaches a lesson that will echo through the 20th century, that modern warfare requires popular support, requires legitimacy, requires belief, that the sacrifice is worthwhile. When that belief evaporates, when soldiers stop believing, when civilians stop sacrificing, governments fall, armies dissolve, wars end, no amount of discipline, no amount of force can sustain warfare without popular will. The Bolsheviks also introduce something new to warfare: ideological combat, class warfare, the mobilization of revolutionary fervor as a military force. During the Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1922, the Red Army fights, not for nation, not for territory, but for ideology, for the communist future, for world revolution. This creates extraordinary motivation, soldiers willing to die, for the vision of a perfect society, for the transformation of humanity itself. Leon Trotsky organizes the Red Army from scratch, creating a force of millions from peasants and workers through political education, through ideological commitment, through terror when necessary. This model of ideological warfare, of political commissars, of using belief as a military multiplier, will be copied by other ideological movements throughout the 20th century. World War I ends November 11th, 1918, with Germany's surrender. 10 million soldiers dead, perhaps another 10 million civilians, entire regions devastated, economies shattered. Surely now, humanity has learned that modern war is too terrible, too destructive, too costly. The League of Nations is founded to prevent future wars through collective security, through diplomacy. Treaties are signed, limiting armaments, establishing borders, creating new nations. People speak of the war to end all wars, believed that humanity has learned its lesson, and yet within 20 years, an even more terrible war will begin. Why? Because the Treaty of Versailles humiliates Germany, imposes impossible reparations, strips territory, forces admission of sole guilt. This creates resentment, rage, a desire for revenge that political movements will exploit. Because the global economy collapses in 1929, creating mass unemployment, desperation, political instability, because democracy, fragile and new in many countries, cannot withstand the pressure, gives way to dictatorship, to fascism, to totalitarian ideologies. And because fundamentally, the underlying causes of the First War, nationalism, imperialism, competition for resources, remain unresolved. In Russia, in Italy, in Germany, in Japan, totalitarian movements rise, offering simple answers to complex problems, promising national greatness, scapegoating enemies, mobilizing mass movements through propaganda and terror. These regimes understand something about the relationship between warfare and society. They organize their entire societies around military values, around preparation for war, around the glorification of sacrifice and struggle. In Nazi Germany, Hitler creates a total militarization of society from childhood through adulthood. Boys join the Hitler Youth, learn military skills, absorb propaganda, prepare for war. The economy is organized for rearmament, for autarky, for eventual conquest. The culture celebrates military virtues, discipline, obedience, sacrifice, contempt for weakness. This is a nation designed for warfare, built for conquest, psychologically prepared for total war. In September 1939, Germany invades Poland, using new tactics, blitzkrieg and the lightning war, fast-moving tanks, supported by aircraft, break through enemy lines, create chaos, exploit confusion. Poland falls in weeks. France falls in 6 weeks. Despite having stronger fortifications, larger armies. How? Through speed, through psychological shock, through the paralysis of command structures, unable to respond fast enough. The blitzkrieg is as much psychological as tactical. It creates panic, destroys morale, collapses resistance before defenders can organize. This is warfare at unprecedented speed, using radio communication, mechanization, air power to move faster than the enemy can think. The psychological impact is devastating. Soldiers surrender not because they're beaten, but because they're overwhelmed, confused, unable to understand what's happening. This demonstrates again that warfare is fought in the mind, that psychological collapse can be more decisive than physical defeat. But the Second World War reaches its ultimate intensity on the Eastern Front, where Germany invades the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, June 1941, the largest military operation in human history. 4 million men, advancing across a 1,000-mile front. This isn't just territorial conquest, it's ideological warfare, racial warfare, a war of annihilation. The Nazis view Slavs as subhuman, worthy only of enslavement or death, fight to destroy not just the Soviet military, but Soviet society itself. The Soviets fight for survival, for their system, for their homeland, with desperate intensity. This is total war, in its purest form. No mercy, no quarter. Civilians targeted deliberately. Entire populations displaced, exterminated. At Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. The two armies fight for 6 months in the ruins of a city, street by street, building by building, room by room. Perhaps 2 million die, soldiers and civilians, in a battle that becomes symbolic for both sides. For Hitler, Stalingrad must be taken because it bears Stalin's name, because losing would be psychological defeat. For Stalin, Stalingrad must be held, for the same reason, because the city bearing his name cannot fall. The battle becomes almost ritual, symbolic, a test of wills, with appalling human cost. When the Germans finally surrender in February 1943, it marks the turning point of the entire war, not just militarily, but psychologically. The myth of German invincibility is shattered. Soviet morale soars. The tide turns. Meanwhile, on the home fronts, societies mobilize even more completely than in World War I. In America, women enter factories, build ships, aircraft, tanks, in numbers unprecedented. Rosie the Riveter becomes a symbol of female capability, of social transformation through warfare. The war economy produces staggering amounts: 300,000 aircraft, 89,000 tanks, 3 million tons of shipping for America alone. This industrial capacity proves decisive. The Allies can replace losses, can outproduce the Axis, can sustain longer. Germany and Japan, fighting with limited resources, blockaded, bombed, cannot keep pace. This demonstrates what the American Civil War showed, that modern warfare is economic, that industrial capacity matters more than military skill. The nation that can produce more, feed more, equip more, will win, regardless of tactical brilliance. And then August 1945, America drops atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In an instant, entire cities vaporize, perhaps 200,000 people die. Immediately all from radiation. This is warfare transformed beyond recognition. One plane, one bomb, one city destroyed. The psychological impact is total. Japan surrenders within days, realizing continued resistance is pointless. But the atomic bomb changes warfare permanently, fundamentally. It makes total war potentially suicidal. For all participants, introduces the concept of mutually assured destruction. For the first time in human history, we possess the means to destroy our entire species, to render the planet uninhabitable. This should make war obsolete, should make conflict unthinkable, should force us to find other means of resolving disputes. And yet, it doesn't, not entirely. Instead, we learn to live with the threat, to manage it, to engage in smaller wars while avoiding the nuclear apocalypse. The Cold War, 1945 to 1991, is defined by this tension between the capacity for total destruction and the need for continued competition. After the war, President Eisenhower, himself a military man, supreme Allied commander in Europe, warns of something new: the military-industrial complex, the permanent fusion of military power, economic interests, and political influence. In his farewell address, 1961, he warns, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence. By the military-industrial complex, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." What does this mean? That warfare has become so integrated into modern economies, so central to industrial production, so important to political power that peace becomes almost impossible, economically undesirable, politically difficult, because too many people, too many companies, too many politicians have a vested interest in military spending, in preparation for war, in the continuation of conflict. Defense contractors employ millions, contribute to political campaigns, lobby for increased spending. Military bases support local economies, provide jobs, create constituencies that resist closure. Think tanks, research institutions, universities receive military funding, produce studies supporting military expansion. The media reports on threats, amplifies fears, creates consensus for military action. And politicians find it easier, politically safer, to support military spending than to oppose it. This creates a system where warfare or preparation for warfare becomes permanent, self-perpetuating. Independent of actual threats, we live now in a world where warfare, or the threat of warfare, shapes everything: borders, alliances, economies, technologies, even the internet you use, GPS that guides you, countless technologies, born from military research, military funding, military necessity. This is the final transformation of warfare from a tool of policy to a permanent feature of modern society, to an organizing principle, thought of human civilization. But warfare continues to evolve into something stranger, more distant, more technological. The Gulf War, 1991, demonstrates new capabilities: precision-guided munitions, smart bombs, cruise missiles, targets destroyed from hundreds of miles away with unprecedented accuracy, with minimal collateral damage. At least theoretically, the psychological distance increases again. Pilots drop bombs from 30,000 feet, never see the results, disconnect action from consequence. Drone warfare takes this further. Operators sit in air-conditioned rooms in Nevada, flying drones over Afghanistan, killing targets, then going home to dinner. The psychological implications are profound and troubling. When killing becomes as distant as a video game, when you never see the target's face, never witness the consequences, does it become too easy? Do we lose the psychological barriers that once limited warfare? Or does the trauma manifest differently? Drone operators report high rates of PTSD, despite never being in danger, because they see, in high definition, the results of their actions. The distance doesn't eliminate psychological cost. It transforms it, makes it stranger, more dissociated. Meanwhile, another transformation: guerrilla warfare, terrorism, insurgency, asymmetric conflict, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, demonstrate that high-tech military superiority doesn't guarantee victory against determined irregular forces. Why? Because these conflicts are fundamentally psychological, about will, about endurance, about political objectives. The United States wins every battle in Vietnam and loses the war because military victory doesn't translate to political success. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese understand that they don't need to win battles, just survive, outlast American will, wait for domestic opposition to end the war. And they're right. American public opinion turns against the war, protests grow, and eventually America withdraws. This demonstrates what we've seen throughout history, that warfare is fought in minds, that belief determines outcomes, that the side willing to sacrifice more often wins, regardless of military capacity. Modern insurgencies in Iraq, in Afghanistan, follow similar patterns. They can't defeat American military in open combat, so they don't try. They wage war on American will, through attrition, through IEDs, through making occupation too costly, too long, too frustrating, and eventually, despite military superiority, despite tactical victories, American forces withdraw because the political will to continue evaporates. This is the reality of modern warfare, that military power alone isn't enough, that you need political legitimacy, popular support, a credible narrative, a sustainable cost. Without these, even the most powerful military cannot achieve lasting victory. As we approach the end of our journey, let's step back and consider what we've learned. From that prehistoric river valley to drone strikes in the 21st century, warfare has evolved continuously, relentlessly, but certain patterns, certain psychological principles remain constant. Organization defeats chaos. The organized band defeated the disorganized rival. The Roman legion defeated undisciplined tribes. Modern militaries defeat irregular forces. Discipline multiplies effectiveness. The Spartan hoplite, the Roman legionary, the Prussian soldier all demonstrate that trained, disciplined forces outperform larger undisciplined ones. Psychology matters more than material. Marathon, Thermopylae, Austerlitz, Vietnam, all show that belief, motivation, can overcome material disadvantage. Logistics determine outcomes. Rome's roads, Napoleon's supply lines, America's industrial capacity, all demonstrate that sustaining forces matters more than deploying them. Innovation disrupts power, the longbow, gunpowder, the machine gun, the atomic bomb. Each reshapes warfare, redistributes power, threatens existing hierarchies. Ideology amplifies motivation. The Greek citizen soldier, the crusader, the revolutionary, the Nazi, the communist, all demonstrate that belief in cause, in meaning, creates extraordinary sacrifice. Total war is self-destructive. The 30 Years' War, World War I, World War II, all demonstrate that unlimited warfare destroys victor and vanquished alike. And throughout, humanity's creativity, applied to destruction, produces ever more efficient means of killing, of controlling, of dominating. This is the history of warfare, humanity's oldest profession, our most persistent activity, our greatest shaper of civilizations. If this deep exploration of power and history has given you new insights into how the world works, how societies organize, how individuals are motivated, consider sharing this with others who seek to understand the fundamental patterns that shape human civilization. And so, as we near the end of our journey, let's step back and see the pattern. Warfare began in scarcity, in competition for resources, in the simple mathematics of survival, but it evolved into something more complex, more psychological, more deeply woven, into human civilization. And so, as we near the end of our journey, let's step back and see the pattern. Warfare began in scarcity, in competition for resources, in the simple mathematics of survival. But it evolved into something more complex, more psychological, more deeply woven, into human civilization. It created social structures, hierarchies, systems of obedience, concepts of honor, ideologies of sacrifice. It drove innovation in technology, in organization, in logistics, in strategy. It shaped borders, created nations, determined which languages you speak, which cultures survived, which disappeared into history, and at every stage, it revealed something fundamental about human nature, our capacity for cooperation, for sacrifice, for loyalty, but also our capacity for cruelty, for dehumanization, for following orders, even terrible orders. Warfare is a mirror, showing us both our greatest virtues and our darkest possibilities. The lessons for today. What can we learn from this long history? First, that power, real power, comes from organization, from discipline, from the ability to coordinate many individuals toward a common purpose. The most successful armies weren't always the bravest or the most numerous, but the most organized, the most disciplined, the most systematic. This applies far beyond warfare, to business, to politics, to any human endeavor requiring cooperation at scale. Second, that psychology matters more than material. The legion that believes in victory fights better than the legion with better weapons. The army with a cause endures hardships that break mercenaries. The soldier who finds meaning in suffering can bear what destroys the soldier who sees only meaningless violence. This too applies universally. Belief, meaning, purpose. These sustain human effort through difficulties that would otherwise be insurmountable. Third, that strategy requires seeing systems, understanding how parts interact, thinking several steps ahead. The great commanders saw what others missed, patterns in chaos, opportunities in crisis, the decisive point in complex situations. This kind of thinking, this strategic vision, is rare, but learnable through practice, through study, through forcing yourself to step back and see the bigger picture. Fourth, that logistics defeats strategy, that execution matters more than ideas, and that consistency and reliability follow through. These win wars. The brilliant plan, poorly executed, loses to the simple plan, executed perfectly. This lesson echoes in every boardroom, every startup, every ambitious project. Ideas are cheap, execution is everything. And now, let me take you back to where we started, that river valley. 12,000 years ago, two bands of humans facing each other. In that moment, everything that followed was already present. The fear, the calculation, the organization, the justification, the first strategy, the first soldier, the first sacrifice. Every war since, every battle, every campaign, every empire traces back to that moment when humans learned that organized violence could reshape the world. Not because violence is noble, or good, or desirable, but because it was effective, because it worked, because the groups that mastered it survived, and the groups that didn't disappeared. And so warfare entered the human toolkit permanently, shaping everything that came after. The borders on your maps, the languages in your mouth, the technologies in your pocket, the political systems you live under, all shaped by thousands of years of warfare, of strategy, of organized violence, of the competition between societies, for survival, for resources, for power, for the right to determine how humans should live. As you drift toward sleep, Carry this understanding with you, that power in all its forms follows certain patterns, certain principles, certain psychological laws, that discipline defeats chaos, that organization multiplies strength, that strategy sees what tactics miss, that meaning sustains effort, that belief multiplies courage, that purpose transforms suffering. These are not just military lessons, they are human lessons, applicable to any challenge, any goal, any ambitious undertaking. You are lying here, in comfort and safety, because others before you organized, disciplined themselves, made sacrifices, built systems that accumulated over generations into the civilization that surrounds you now. Rest now with this knowledge that the ambition you carry, the goals you pursue, the changes you want to make require the same qualities that won empires, built nations, changed the world: patience, discipline, strategic thinking, the ability to endure, the willingness to sacrifice the present for the future. The wisdom of warfare teaches us that victory comes not in moments, but in movements, not in single battles, but in campaigns, in the long accumulation of small advantages over time, like the Roman legion, marching steadily, reliably, toward distant horizons, like the patient siege, grinding slowly, inevitably, towards surrender, like the strategic mind, thinking beyond the moment, seeing the pattern, waiting for the decisive point. This is how worlds change, through the patient, relentless, disciplined application of organized human will toward an inevitable conclusion. And as you sleep tonight, your mind processes these patterns, these lessons, these truths, absorbing the wisdom of 5,000 years of human conflict, so that tomorrow you wake with deeper understanding of how power works, how change happens, how ambitious goals are achieved through the same timeless principles that raised empires, won battles, shaped civilizations. Rest now. Let the knowledge settle, like sediment in deep water, like centuries of history compressing into wisdom, like the patient march of legions toward dawn. Sleep well, ambitious one. The world awaits your contribution to the ongoing story of human achievement, built on the lessons of all who came before. Rest and prepare for your own campaign, your own patient march toward victory. Good night.